Hey Joe, I'm pumped.
Hey, are we gonna start over and repeat everything?
I'm going to echo what I'm going to echo what I think I've heard most of the board members or the commission members say, and that's that whatever you do, you go big as possible. I think it's it's important, however funds may be allocated otherwise, that what funds are remaining are still used in an R&D role, because I think that's been a very valuable thing that this commission has done. And like any other R&D effort, there have been some failures and there have been some successes, and that's inevitable with R&D. But I would suggest that you go as big as possible while essentially eliminating the community grants. I don't think they're high impact, and some of them are fairly nebulous in terms of their relationship to overall growth, or overall economic development. But I would try and leave some funds, at least potentially, for lower cost, high impact projects like Bookstock or other things that really promote the Woodstock brand in a way that does what Jill was talking about, which is to start marketing this as a community, not just to live in and to develop. So it's not an easy task, but I think I appreciate that you're undertaking it at this point, and there's going to have to be some very hard choices made. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Susie, and then Jeff.
Susie Stoles, Woodstock Village. At the last, I want to just offer a warning. At the last town meeting in March, it was an informational meeting, so there wasn't a lot of attendance. There was a lot of comments from people in the audience saying EDC funds should go to infrastructure. And they said, we can bring up a vote. And you guys need to think about that. Like, be a bit more flexible about the needs of the community, and that's infrastructure support. Because they can come up with a vote and put a ballot on the measure and say let's all funds go to infrastructure. And that I think would be really unfortunate, because tourism and the 1% options tax that was just passed helps fund infrastructure. And so it would be a shame not to sort of work towards earning more of those 1% options tax, because that would help everybody. So let's not just, so I guess my advice is, don't be so rigid on what the voters asked for or voted on years ago. Situation has changed a lot, and flexibility is needed.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, is your hand still up, or did you? Oh,
yes, yes, it was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what I've heard, but some parts I find problematic. And I think some of what the voters voted for originally remain important. And I think sometimes, for instance, when it comes to marketing, because it's been very busy these past 3 weeks, we forget what much of the rest of the year is like when it's not very busy, like these past 3 weeks. And that all of the people who work in these businesses as benefit from the marketing that has been successful in Woodstock, which the EDC has cut back on, but the program remains vigorous and successful. So I would warn against cutting all sorts of things out that have worked and are important, because that will remain important to the economic vitality of our community going forward. So that's one part that I certainly hope the EDC retains. And I think that's very important to our economic vitality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Is there anyone else, before I come back to the room here, anyone else online who'd like to make a suggestion or a comment about how these funds should be allocated?
Buddhist?
Anyone here? Anyone in the room? I haven't heard a bad comment, so I haven't heard a bad comment about how the funds should be. I think all of these funds are faithful. All of these funding suggestions are faithful to both the select board's priorities and what the voters suggested. Voted for. I struggle with, Susie, I struggle with one thing you said about the situation has changed. Don't be so rigorous in following what the voters say. If you, it'd be more flexible, right? If you had another chance to say it, maybe that would make me easier for me to agree with. It would be that what the voters suggested allows for a fair bit of flexibility. What the voters mandated allows for a fair bit of flexibility, and which we may not have taken, or which you're suggesting we take. And so then I can, would agree with that. I do think that, I mean, we have to follow, we've taken an oath to follow what the voters voted for. But I agree, there is flexibility in what they asked for, and reasonable people can disagree about whether a program, and have tonight, whether a program fits what, follows what they asked for or not. And I do think that there is a sentiment, I don't know how large that sentiment is because we haven't taken a vote, as to what the best way is to use those, what the community thinks the best way is to use those funds. And I think that Roger's point about hard choices, another way to say that is we can't possibly do all the things that have been suggested here. So, yeah. So on that positive note, but I mean, that's what we're here for, right? So, I mean, this is, I think, one of the purposes of the EDC.
John, what you said, it rings the bell. I mean, you can't possibly do it all, but what we have to do is what we're asked to do, or what the law says we should be doing.
Right.
That's kind of narrows it right down.
Well,
I think.
Right. So I guess what I'd like to do is ask a process question. And let's, how do we get, I think, let me make a process suggestion and get reactions to it, but it's not a complete suggestion. I think that the community, I can observe that the community doesn't react well to a blank sheet of paper. It doesn't react well to the question, what should we do? Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't react well. It doesn't react. There's a few people here, which is great. Thank you for coming. And but it doesn't really react much. It reacts to something being done, and then whether or not we should do it or not. So I think the way that we can make a decision about how to use the Economic Development Reserve Fund is to put forward several concrete options that are in spirit aligned with the 2 or 3 or 4 different kind of approaches that have been outlined tonight, all of which kind of head in a general direction, but aren't exactly the same. Like, how much do we reserve for entrepreneurial and for, Roger, the thing that Todd talked about and that you talked about, small, high impact initiatives. How much do we reserve for that? How much do we put towards climate resiliency as opposed to housing? There's an argument to be made, perhaps depending on your generation, as to both of those are kind of existential for Woodstock.
So what are you suggesting, a budget presented to the select board?
No. Before that, I'm suggesting the development of 3 or 4 tangible alternatives that that Jill and the housing group have started to do that for housing. Mm-hmm. And if one of those 4 alternatives was housing centric, and housing centric might be 75% of the remaining funds or 95 or 100% of the remaining funds, but it's housing centric and it crowds out the other things, and it means we can't do some other things, but here's the best way to use that money for housing. And then there might be a continue what we're currently doing, which we don't have to define. There might be an entrepreneurial centric, there might be a climate resiliency centric. Maybe there's one more. Anyway, we don't have to define those precisely tonight, but that we might work over the next couple of months. And I'd sort of ask Laura a little bit about a question when I'm done about when the select board would benefit from and want to know this from us, in the same way that you want to know similar kinds of things from all the commissions.
But ultimately, it falls into the realm of the select board to approve or disapprove. whatever we put forward.
Yeah, correct.
So, I mean, they could choose to obey the law or not obey the law.
That's true. And we can, and you know, when we get our
I
police
got a
chief,
smile out of her for that one. Yay!
Right. yes,
Right?
before we consider the arrest profile of the select board members. I think, so the only idea that I have is to get to work on 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere between there, concrete alternatives for how these funds could be used. And to present those, to work for a couple of months on that, and then to hold a couple of series of meetings where we're presenting to the community, not the tougher question we presented to you all tonight, and where some of you responded specifically, which is, what should we do? Blank sheet of paper. But let's take some of the ideas and say, okay, here's 5 ideas. Which ones do you like best, and how would you modify those? So let's just talk about the process. EDC members for a moment. Greta?
I'm just curious, are you talking about 2025
No,
money, or what money are we?
I'm talking about money for any, well, each of those initiative. I'm talking about money for the long term. I don't want to leave out, I'm talking about money for the long term. So at least multi-year, the next 5 years, the next 7 years. Could be longer if we're talking about housing. I think if you ask the housing group, they would basically say, look, it's $100,000. We can eliminate all the this is what the housing group would say. And I have some empathy for their arguments. We can have no regulations, 0. You can build anything you want, anywhere you want, and no housing will be built in Woodstock because it's $100,000 loss to build a house in Woodstock. I mean, other than a luxury house, to build workforce housing. We've started to do some good analysis about this. That's why it's not being built. So if we want to build, if we have $325,000, and that's going to grow with inflation over time, let's, you know, whatever, we can build 3 or 4 units a year. If we want to build 50 units, we need the money for 12 years. Let's do that. That's option 2. Option 1 is keep doing what we're doing. Option 2 is that. But let's kind of get those numbers solidified. Let's get more details than just Jill describing it briefly tonight. And let's do that with a couple of other ideas. Michael can help lead a climate resiliency centric approach, or an equal approach, or, you know, whatever. That's kind of the procedure that I'm proposing.
And we would like to present that to the select board.
Eventually, it will be, yeah, eventually, but first get public input and so forth. Todd, sorry, I didn't see you.
So no problem. I'll ask you later how to raise my hand in this new app. My concern is that the select board has a lot of turnover. The EDCs have a lot of turnover. Town folk are only getting more angry. We have the school issue. We have the sewer issue. Like it's like the war in Gaza, like what happened to the Ukrainian war. It's always something, right? Terrible. And we're losing our news cycle on the other issues the town has that are 50-year-old problems. And my issue with what you're presenting is that if we do multi-year grants or multi-year processes, while that sounds great in a C-suite environment of a properly ran company, the town's not ran that way. It's very fickle. 3 people on the listserv can change policy with one ear of the select board, or one of us. It's that way. It's a small town. And so we serve at the, contrary to what Joe says, I know what you mean, Joe, but they can change the rules whenever they want. The town can call another vote whenever they want. People are getting more sort of in tune with this disruptive behavior in the way the muni governments ran, right? And it's not actually helpful for anyone. So, in my opinion, so I think we need to focus on like maybe 2-year things, because that money could be gone in year 3 when a new select board comes in and says, oh, we need all of it for the sewer. Sorry. And then we have some off the hook 5 to 7 year plan that gets derailed, right? I think we need to think shorter term, long term.
Okay, Joe, let me modify then. Let me accept your proposal to make it and instead of or. Let's put together a small number of options which are defined by whatever makes the option best. If flexibility is what you're describing over time is the best, is something that we think the community would support and is the most effective, then we can have a proposal that has a 1-year or 2-year timeline. If someone thinks that we need to commit for 20 years in order to make it work, then they can have that. And those 2 proposals can go up against each other in our public discussions first, in our presentation to the select board. And potentially, if it's seems appropriate, given the options to the voters.
So essentially, I think what I think I hear you saying, John, is the select board wants to take $75,000 per year for 30 years and apply it towards the bond. And what you're saying is, well, that may be one option, but here's something else that we'd like to talk to you about. Is that right?
Not quite. I'm basically saying this is where we think the economic development, I'm not opining on the 75,000. I'm simply saying whatever money is available in the Economic Development Reserve Fund, this is how it should be spent. I guess my view,
Other than 75,000 directly every year for 30 years.
to be honest, I don't think that the priorities that we set would be affected by whether there's 325 or 400,000 in that. I'm not trying to diminish your.
Oh, no,
issue.
no, I don't think you are.
I think a strategy for 325 and a strategy for 400 would be
So
the same
what you're
strategy.
saying is you think there's gonna be enough money to keep everybody happy?
No, I think there'll be $325,000 available, and that's
Yeah.
a lot of money that needs to be put towards the right purpose. I think the point is, a couple of you have mentioned this. I think the town is going to there's going to be pressure, as someone said at the, I think Susie, you said. It's reasonable. It's not even unreasonable to have pressure to say there's a pot of money. It's the only pot of money that's unallocated. Let's use that.
Yep.
We need to be clear about, and let's use that. And we know what the that is going to be. It's very specific and it's very limited list. It's to renovate the town hall, it's to renovate the sidewalks, it's to build a new water treatment plant, it's to build the high school. And that will use up the EDC money until the end of time. And it's not unreasonable for people to ask for that. I don't agree with that personally, but it's perfectly reasonable for them to ask that. What we haven't done and what we now can do, because the select board laid out their priorities and doesn't have funding for them, just to be clear, right? It doesn't yet have funding for them. Is that a fair statement? Not completely. Okay. Okay, well, fine. Anyway, the point is that the select board has now laid out their priorities. We, I think, need to say to the community, choose what you will, but here's what the options are. And the options aren't just the high school and so forth. The options are also housing or climate resiliency or childcare or whatever it is. And you can't, and with the Economic Development Reserve Fund money, you can't have both. You can split it, but basically if you spend $1 on childcare, you can't spend $1 on the water treatment plant. And if you spend $1 on the water treatment plant, you can't spend that same dollar on childcare. I think it's our obligation to lay out those choices. And to do that, I think we've started tonight to lay out some concepts. They kind of generally point in one direction, but they're not identical. There's more work to do. So
John,
yeah, Todd, go ahead.
We're missing also, I spoke about it a little bit earlier about there's so many brilliant minds. Like the guy up the street from me, was one of the inventors of Keurig, right? There's so many brilliant minds in this town in the Upper Valley, like seriously brilliant people. I think we need to reach out to get those folks involved too, because what we're missing is the plans to come to us, the proposals to come to us, the things that we can riff on. So we can say housing, we can say sustainability, we can say all these big ticket items, but what's buried beneath them, where our money could actually go. If I'm sitting here as a taxpaying resident, that's what I want to know. I'm like, oh, housing's great, but where are you going to spend it? Because I still have the sewer bill to pay and it just doubled. So I think we're in a vicious cycle there. And I think that sort of, we need to get people to understand, and I know we've all tried so hard, but we're at war here with crumbling infrastructure and lack of funds. It's a 50-year war. And by the way, the moment this war battle gets fought, and if we win it, in 50 years, the same war is going to get repeated again. So I struggle with defining this stuff, because what does it mean if we don't have specific proposals?
So I think you're agreeing. In shorthand, my suggestion is that we develop a small set of specific proposals. So.
Yeah, I don't want to do a broad swath. Exactly. I think we need specific things to give to the community.
Okay, I think we're agreed there. Come up. Any other comments about process, Roger?
Yeah, I hate to be cynical, but
Oh, go ahead.
I don't actually hate it. I'm just,
Exactly.
I don't think you should get bogged down in the public process. I think you should worry, I think you should worry about the process for developing these ideas. You can vet them with the public all you want. Mostly, they're not going to know what you're talking about, and mostly they're not going to show up. So I would agree with you that for the $325,000 that's now fungible, and I'll throw in an editorial comment here. I don't think there's any question in my mind that the original charge from the voters allows a project that contributes to the infrastructure of the town. I just don't think there's any question of ambiguity in the language of those two goals. But I think you're right in that you should be developing very specific, actionable programs that can be over a number of years, or over 2 years, or over 1 year, if it's possible, achievable with the pot of money that you've got. And that, again, that's a really hard set of things to do, but that's why you get the big money.
Any other comments for folks online about the process, about how we should go about? I think it doesn't seem to be exactly how we develop the proposal, the options, and what level of detail and so forth is, and how it exactly sequences rolls out to the select board or the voters is still to be decided. But it doesn't seem like there's any other ideas for how to proceed. Are you?
Am I okay with it? I don't know.
Well, I think we'll find. I mean, we don't have to know. We may find out after 1 or 2 meetings. I think what is sort of happening is, to go back to the very beginning of the EDC at the end of 2015, the first thing that happened was that the money started to come into the Economic Development Reserve Fund, and EDC wasn't really ready to spend it. And so if you remember, the big complaint in 2017 was, why is the EDC not spending any of the money?
We're spending any money.
Right. We had, 600 or 700, we had 2 years worth of funds and had spent almost none of it. And then we went through really a couple of iterations of spending the money to get to the place where we are here, where for the first time in the last 24 months, we have spent more than what was added to the, we drew down our reserves to the point where we have, very little reserve, $50,000, something like that, $75,000 unencumbered remaining. And I think what our task is, and I think we should get the select board's feedback on this, is.
But what we didn't do with the money, John, is what we're being asked to do now. We didn't identify infrastructure. We didn't do that with the money.
Correct.
I mean,
I'm just saying we spent the. My point is, I'm just talking about spending.
We spent the money, but we didn't spend it on a new plow or anything like that.
I'm just talking about the fact that we're going. I think what we should be doing, it sounds like, is going back to the very original period where we're not spending our money. We should take some time. Maybe it takes us 6 months. We should take some time to figure out. The Economic Development Reserve Fund is essentially encumbered. It's spent on the things that we believe were what we were supposed to spend it on. The world has changed. There are competing priorities. We can't do it all. The select board has asked us to stop funding. I guess what I would ask, and Lisa, we can talk about bringing this back to the select board kind of more officially, but what I would ask informally is, give us 6 months to figure out. I mean, the select board just gave us the priorities 8 weeks ago. And I think you're still discussing them, right? I mean, you're still sort of refining, or maybe you're pretty much settled on those. I mean, yeah. Maybe you can just sort of talk about the process. But I would sort of say, let's pause our spending. Let the Economic Development Reserve Fund start to fill up again while we develop this set of options, and then follow a process.
Hi, Laura Powell, Woodstock Select Board again. Yeah, I can give some clarity into the process and also the background of the conversation behind goals and priorities. Like John said, one of the asks from our town manager, who has been with us for a year and a half, was that we come together as two boards and set goals, not just for ourselves, but for the advisory boards, of which the EDC is one, and the other boards that we have, because we have many in our town, so that we could work together as one towards a future together. And so that's what we've been working with the trustees to do. That's how we got the 4 priorities you've seen before. There is a overwhelming, I would say there's an overwhelming sentiment, not just with town hall staff, but in our community, that we all work in various silos and sometimes I would say cancel each other's progress out or do redundant work because we are not communicating and working together with each other, which has long been the case. So this process in which we had our advisory boards come before us to tell us not just what they do and what they've been doing. Our plan in the future is to have each board come before us on a regular basis to update us with their progress. We're meeting again tomorrow to set goals. And I think some boards will be getting very specific goals, like the Planning Commission, for example, will be charged with auditing village bylaws as it relates to development and zoning, so that we can allow more, more development and stuff in the village. We have not talked about what the goals for the Economic Development Commission Fund are. We could direct you to do something, but I also think it's a great exercise as the EDC has been very impactful over the past few years as they've narrowed their focus to ideate and collaborate and come up with ideas. The stoppage of appropriation, I guess, is a result of feeling as though we want to, again, move forward with those goals in mind together, and that we need to not entertain any more grant funding until that process is finished. I'm certainly, I think to Roger and Susie's earlier point, probably more aware than most community members how the Economic Development Reserve Fund is viewed. And I think the select board, though EDC members and community members might disagree, we have and want to be very prudent with the funding. It is something that people have asked us to spend all the time. I had a request last week for someone to buy Halloween candy with it. I had somebody else who wanted to buy a speaker system with it. So we are very mindful of that. It is why we've settled on the $75,000, which represents roughly 20% of your annual revenue, of the annual revenue of the Economic Development Reserve Fund. I would also like to clarify and speak to, because I think it's been brought up several times tonight, about the importance of economic development. And right now, the select board knows, as many community members do, that I'm really sorry you can't see me. I'm that short.
Can you just put your laptop down? Or
Yeah. That who are aware that economic development is tied to our infrastructure capacity specifically right now. It is something, as Jill mentioned before, we are not able to get any new water connections until the water company is owned by the town. And so that's why, in addition to several other things, and if you want specifics, I'm more than happy to lay them out for you about specific projects, 1B or the Vondel, and why they're important for economic development. But I think in general, what I would say is that all of us recognize how the efforts of the Economic Development Commission, whether it's workforce housing, childcare, and even tourism, are impacted by our current inability to grow our tax base. Those are things that are all impacted. And that is why both boards have agreed to focus specifically on this. So with that said, I think, 6 months is a great goal. 6 months will be probably around town meeting. So I think that, it's good for us to keep in communication with the EDC as you guys have ideas. And certainly we will do the same. Like I said, we're meeting again tomorrow to ideate. I know specific board members have specific ideas of projects that they want for the EDC, but I can't speak for them tonight. So.
Sure, go ahead, but just come up to the podium. Thanks, Laura. And we're going to try to wrap up in the next few minutes, so go ahead.
Susie Sills, Woodstock. How difficult, what is the process for a disgruntled citizen to say, I want to get a measure on the ballot to have all EDC funds go to infrastructure? Because if that ballot gets on the if that measure gets on the ballot, it's passing.
I think, Susie, I would have to check with Charlie, but I would imagine that they just need a percentage of resident signatures like they do with most petition ballot measures. So I don't know off the top of my head what that is. But certainly very doable. And to Susie's point, something that has been asked of us. I think everybody would agree there is a finite amount of funds and an infinite amount of things for us to do. However, our reasoning and justification specifically for using the Economic Development Reserve Fund is something that we've talked about at length and something that ties directly to our capacity to grow our tax base for community development.
Well, I gotta say one thing. What I'm most impressed with, and I think long overdue, and I completely support and applaud the efforts of the select board to at least communicate with the other commissions. I really do. It hasn't been done in the past. It's been much needed for a long time. You guys are finally doing it, and I think it's great.
Thanks, Joe.
Laura, if I can just make on behalf of the EDC, if unless anyone from the EDC disagrees with this comment, feel free to say so when I'm done. But I would just request that you give us the 6 months-ish, not a year, but not 2 months, to identify in tangible, coherent ways a half dozen-ish, 3 to 6 ways in which the funds in the Economic Development Reserve Fund could be used for something other than to pay for, it really doesn't matter whether all of those infrastructure projects are needed.
Yes.
I think that the select board, unless the only alternative to that in terms of good, effective government, which is one of the priorities, would be for the select board to do that process.
Yes.
And if you intend to do that yourself, fantastic.
Right.
But if you don't intend to do it, and then let us do it, invite you in to participate from beginning to you, meaning you and your colleagues, to participate from beginning to end, but leverage the volunteers that we have here. And unlike, and I'm sure that there are specific ideas and projects, hundreds of them, like candy and so forth. But I think I just ask that you would give us that opportunity to lay out those alternatives. And you as representatives of the community or the voters, however the process is, you can decide that, reasonable people can disagree about what these funds should be used for. Give us the time to lay those options out.
Definitely. Our goal is to have well-vetted strategies that everybody supports, come in front of us. And so I think we're on the same page with that.
Okay, sorry. Jill, do you want to last comment unless there's something earth-shattering that someone else has?
Yes, Jill Davis, Woodstock. I think you're being too generous with yourself by allowing yourself 6 months. I don't think the alternatives are very difficult. And I think you'd be in a much stronger position if you could get your act sorted out in 1 month, because budget season is coming up and the select board are going to have to face the reality of the budget. They're going to have to face the town meeting in March. All of these are within your 6-week windows when you're sitting there going, should it be housing or childcare, or how difficult is it? And not to insult that you want to take time to do this properly, but honestly, consider it.
That sounds like something I would say, Jill, but I've learned that's offensive.
Well, I just want to point out, Jill, that Woody Johnson, does everyone know who Woody Johnson is?
No.
Woody Johnson is the owner of the New York Jets.
Oh God, yes, I know.
We're now 2-5 after having Super Bowl aspirations and losing to the
He was
Pittsburgh
a former
Steelers last
ambassador
night.
to England, wasn't he?
Woody Johnson 2 weeks ago said thinking is overrated. So, Jill, I will add you to the list of people, along with Woody Johnson, who is perhaps the most unsuccessful football owner in the history of the NFL. I will now put you into that bucket that thinking is overrated. But kidding aside, it's a fair point, and I think we need to think about basically January 15th-ish is when the budget needs to be fixed. And if we don't have those...
Thinking may not be overrated, but taking your time to make a decision, if you miss the vote, it's a bit of a problem.
I understand, it's a fair point. we like the choice of where to put the funds, that we may not be able to do everything. We may have to jettison thinking, or at least thinking slowly. All right, are there any other comments that did people from the community, well, anything from the EDC? Any EDC members want to add anything? Susan, do you want to add anything from the select board? We've been sort of focused on Laura providing feedback because she is sitting right in front of us, but did you want to correct the record, or?
No, I'm fine. I agree with what Laura said. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from here?
I will say I appreciate Laura's comments too, and I think you are tall.
It's misinformation.
Yeah.
All right. Can we have a motion to adjourn, Joe? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Michael,
Aye.
where's Michael? We have to otherwise we have to do it. All right, he's raising his hand. Any opposed? All right, 8:04, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Quicker than I thought it would go, John.